Yeah. Yeah, and sorry. All right, if everybody's ready, my name is Josh Tewalt. I'm the director for the Idaho Department of Correction. Let me give a quick recount of events from today, starting with what I think most of you are most eager to hear about. Earlier this morning, our medical team did a physical assessment of Mr. Creech. After that assessment, they had communicated to me as well as Warden Richardson that they believed and had confidence that they would be able to establish venous access on Mr. Creech. Once Mr. Creech was escorted into the execution chamber and was strapped down, the medical team entered and attempted to establish IV access. The team attempted 8 times through multiple limbs and appendages to establish IV access consistent with IDOC's policy. It's worth noting in our conversations with the medical team afterwards that what they encountered in some instances was an access issue, but in others where they could establish access, they were unable. It was a vein quality issue that made them not confident in their ability to administer chemicals through the IV site once established. Consistent with our training and with our protocols, we from the very beginning try to be very candid and upfront that this isn't a do-it-at-any-cost process, that our first objective is to carry this out with dignity, professionalism, and respect. And part of that was training and practicing for the chance that they were unable to establish IV access. Once the medical team leader had determined that it would be unlikely that they were going to be able to establish IV access, that was when we halted the execution. Mr. Creech at this time is back in his cell in F block. We are planning to allow the death warrant to expire because we don't anticipate a change in status or circumstance that would allow us to continue with the execution today. We don't have an idea of timeframes or next steps at this point. Those are things we will be discussing in the days ahead. And once the state has determined the next course of action, we'll certainly make those actions known in the appropriate venue. While I'm here, and I'll certainly defer to the media witnesses to recount their experiences, I do want to take a second to talk about the competence of our medical team and our confidence in them. As part of our training and rehearsals for this, every single member of our administrative team, including myself, this is a team of competent medical professionals, and we've allowed them to establish IV access on each of us individually. We train for a number of different scenarios and potential outcomes, and my confidence in this team just could not be higher. It's also worth noting that when you look at our SOP, the qualifications that our medical team has, these are people who in their day jobs, people's lives depend on their ability to establish an IV. So our confidence in them remains high, and while the execution was unsuccessful, I think their efforts were, I think it would be wrong to call it a failure. They did their level best in a professional way that was respectful of the process, and when it appeared that those efforts were going to be unsuccessful, they did the right thing and opted to stop additional efforts so that we could evaluate next steps. With that, I will stop for a moment and allow the other witnesses to speak to their particular experiences, and then I'm happy to answer any questions after that.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Boone. I'm a correspondent with the Associated Press. I'll attempt to do sort of a minute-by-minute recount of what we saw so that you can understand what happened. Let's see. So the media witnesses were brought into the witness room at 9:50 this morning. We were in there with several other people, including Hayden Dodds from the Board of Correction, Jared Larson from the Governor's Office. There was a correctional officer in there with us, and Ada County Sheriff Clifford. At 9:55, it sounded to me as if perhaps Mr. Creech's witnesses were being brought into the room. Just so you understand, that it is a separate witness room and we are not able to see them. They have their own window into the execution chamber. So what we can see when we sit in there is the execution chamber itself, which has a padded sort of medical style table with straps on it, a podium where the warden stands, 2 phones, one red, one black, and then in the walls there are some holes where the IV tubing goes into the medication room or the medical team room, which is actually behind the execution chamber and is not visible to us. The medical team apparently views Mr. Creech throughout the process, the ones that aren't in the execution room, via some closed circuit cameras, I think, and I saw 2 cameras or 3 cameras above the medical table itself. So that is where I presume they were viewing the events. At 9:59 this morning, I heard some faint pounding from outside our room. It's not clear what that pounding was. It sounded like somebody sort of rhythmically banging on metal. I do not know what that sound was. It lasted for a few minutes and then stopped. At 10 a.m., the warden and the director and some correctional officers entered the execution room, followed almost immediately by the escort team, which was 6 people escorting Mr. Creech in. He was already on a gurney. They brought him in, they moved him via a backboard to the execution table and then began strapping him down, first his right arm, then his left. He seemed he was not moving much during this process. He wasn't fidgeting. The escort team was standing at attention when they weren't actively strapping him down. And that placement of him on the table was complete by 10:03. Once he was on the table, he was looking at people in his witness area, which was adjacent to ours, and appeared to be talking or mouthing some things. At 10:04, the medical team began assessing his veins and applying an EKG to his chest to monitor his heart rate. And they took several steps to sort of prepare his right arm for access to the IV. They used devices including like a laser device or an infrared device, a vein finder tool. They used a hot compress. They attached a blood pressure cuff that they inflated to try to get the veins to distend. So by about 10:11, they began trying to establish the first IV, and within 2 minutes, at 10:13, they decided the first IV attempt was unsuccessful. They again tried a new site. Each IV step took several steps, right? So they would clean the skin, they would inject a numbing agent, they would re-clean the skin, and then they would attempt to insert the IV itself. Excuse me. IVs continued to be attempted in each arm first. So they tried the right arm first, they tried the hand, they tried the left arm, both sides, and then they decided that they needed to move to his legs. And at that point, they removed the sheet that was covering his legs, took off his orange, like slide-on style shoes, pulled up his green scrub-style pants, and then worked around the hook and loop style straps that were restraining both of his ankles. At that point, they moved the medical cart that they were using to hold their supplies too near Mr. Creech's feet, so it would be next to where they were working. This obscured our view partially, and we were unable to see exactly how many attempts directly that they were trying. However, based on the number of times they inflated the cuff and used numbing agents, our count was also 8 attempts. Let's see. So by 10:43, they were still, at 10:41, they were still attempting to find IV sites. At that point, one of the medical team members opened a drawer in the cart, appeared to see that they were running low on supplies. That person left the room, came back with the pocket of his sort of scrub style navy blue jacket filled with supplies. When he left, Director T. Walt followed him briefly out of the room and also came back quickly. And that medical team member made an additional trip out to get, I think, one more thing. The supplies were then restocked. They were still attempting repeatedly throughout the next several minutes. At 10:54, Mr. Creech lifted his head, looked at the medical team and said, "My legs hurt a bit." At that point, they appeared to try to like lift or move his legs to apparently relieve some of that discomfort. Throughout this process, Mr. Creech was looking at the people in his witness room. He was sometimes, his arms were strapped, but he was sometimes waving like this or waggling, like wagging his fingers at them. He was sometimes mouthing things to them, but he wasn't saying anything loud enough that we could hear it. At 10:57, Warden Richardson and Director T. Walt spoke to each other quietly, nodded, and then the warden went and spoke to the medical team. Also at that time, the medical team began removing the EKG. They left by 10:58, and that's when Warden Richardson announced that the execution would be halted because of the inability to find a successful IV site. We were taken out of the room. A short time later, before we left, I saw Director Richardson walk over to Mr. Creech. At one point, he placed his hand on his arm. He whispered to him quietly. Then he moved around to the other side of Mr. Creech, where he was on the table, so that his back was to the windows, and appeared to be talking with him as Creech nodded back. When the warden announced that the execution would be halted, Mr. Creech looked at the people in his in the separate room, his witnesses, and waved at them again, and then sort of closed his eyes and shook his head.
Hi, I'm Brenda with KTVB. Rebecca did a great job explaining minute by minute, but I'm going to start with when he was brought in that gurney. It started on time. It started at 10 o'clock. He was brought in that gurney. He was still strapped in that gurney, and then he was lifted and put on the table, and they covered him with a white blanket. At 10:03, that's when he made eye contact with his family. He waved to his witnesses on that room there. He waved, and again, like Rebecca mentioned, you could just see his fingers move there, but he was locked in with his family at 10:03, that is. At 10:04, he actually made contact with us to see who the other witnesses were. He didn't really he didn't say anything, he didn't mumble. He just looked at us and then just laid back down. That's when the medical team started the process. They took some breathing assessment. They also put 5 what they were calling stickers on his chest, and then 2 on his abdomen. I did catch at 10:06, he, throughout this whole entire process, he would mumble words, but I was able to catch what he said at 10:06, looking at his family. It appeared that he said, "I'm sorry," looking at his family again. At 10:10, that's when the first IV was administered, and like Rebecca mentioned, it started at the right arm, went over to the left one, and then they had to go take off his shoes and proceed with his legs. This happened 8 times. Through each time, though, I did notice that Creech, every time the IV was administered, he would make this snoring noise. He would also twitch. It appeared like he would go in and out of his sleep. And yeah, like I mentioned, he would twitch and snore. There was another point at 10:32 where I was able to make out what he was saying to his witness room there. It appears that he said, "I love you." This was after a couple of attempts at administering the IV. After that, he went to that, again, to the noises, the snoring noises, and the twitching that he would do. I will also mention, kind of backtracking here, in the room, the medical staff, they were covered in white cloth. They also had goggles. And there was about 3 of them administering this IV. There was a point, the 7th time, when the IV was administered at 10:54, like Rebecca mentioned. He did say, "My legs hurt a bit." That's when the medical staff helped him lift his legs up. I will also note that from what I could see, from my point of view, he didn't seem like he was in pain. The only time that he really said he was at 10:54 when he said, again, quote, "My legs hurt a bit." Then after that moment, he shook his head. He would shake his head sometimes. I'm just looking at his family. At 10:58, that's when the execution was halted. That's when it was announced. They couldn't find, they weren't able to have any successful attempts. So that's when it was halted. We were actually told to leave the room. Creech was still laying there on the table. And when that announcement was made, from my point of view, he was looking up and mumbling a couple of words. I didn't make that out, but he would just look up to the roof and just mumble a couple words there. After that, we were escorted, but he was told a couple of words that we also weren't able to hear, but then we left the room.
I'm Scott McIntosh from the Idaho Statesman. I don't have much to add. I will corroborate what Rebecca Boone said and what Brenda Rodriguez said. I also, when Mr. Creech came into the room, he looked back at his witness room and his eyes started to fill with tears, and I heard him sniffling, and he seemed to be puffing a little bit. And I will also say that I could not hear what Mr. Creech said, but based on his lips moving, it looked like he said, "I'm sorry." So I will confirm that. The only other thing I'll add is that the medical staff, there were 3 of them. There was 1 head person and 2 assistants. They were dressed in blue scrubs head to toe, and their faces were covered completely, except for their eyes, with white cloth. And then their eyes were covered with safety goggles, safety glasses. There was one moment when they were trying to put an IV in his right hand that it seemed like his hand was twitching and hurting. Other than that, I will also confirm that it did not seem that he was in discomfort or pain during that hour-long process. Other than that, I'll stand for questions.
I'm Roland Barris from Idaho News 6, KIVI TV, ABC. The other witnesses have given a really good rundown of everything that pretty much happened. I guess I want to just add a little bit of perspective from what a bizarre circumstance this is for anyone to go witness. I think going into the room, seeing someone lifted off of a gurney onto an execution table is just surreal. And then to see the operators in the room, who, in my opinion, were very professional. Again, Creech, to me, did not look like he was in pain at any time, any severe pain. Mild discomfort, I might say, from time to time. But it is bizarre also to see, as you described, the medical techs with cap on, goggles, face mask, pretty much covered almost head to toe. It's a strange sort of thing to see. At one point, they covered him with a white sheet, and it was kind of bizarre to see how it was almost like when you unfurl a flag of some sort, and they did it with a flourish almost. And then he was covered with a white sheet. And I guess I would say, just lastly, as time went by and the attempts continued to fail, at first there was very clear communication from the techs, Mr. Creech, this IV attempt has failed. You could sense the frustration in the room as time went along. And I think I timed it, I don't know about you guys, maybe somewhere around 46, 47 minutes total from the time of the first one, IV. Somewhere around there, 45 to 47 minutes. It's a long time. About 57 you have? Sure. So, understandably, I think you could see there was some frustration in the room a little bit as they tried to get more equipment in and try again. And I guess I would leave it open to question now, since there's probably going to be some other questions, whether or not there is a certain number that you decide to call it at, or is it just left up to the media, or to the, not the media, of course, but to the medical folks to handle that?
Yeah, real quick, just a couple things to add context. When Mr. Creech noted discomfort with his leg, he was experiencing a cramp, and the medical team worked to try to assuage that. I wasn't sure how briefed everybody was on the timeline, but Mr. Creech spent the entirety of the evening up until about 4:45 this morning with his attorneys as well as his wife Leanne. He took a mild sedative, as he's afforded to do per policy, and actually was able to sleep for at least a little bit prior to this morning's event. So I think there was, as noted, he was very tired when he was brought into the execution chamber. In terms of a set number of attempts, we rely on the direction of our medical team. I met with them after Mr. Creech had a physical examination this morning. We had established that we thought there were potentially 8 access points. Those are the points they attempted to access, and when it became clear that that wasn't going to be successful, that's when the execution was halted. One other thing to note: the medical team leader did leave the room to gather additional supplies. After the assessment this morning, they had opted to look at smaller gauge catheters to try to establish IV access, and so it was to get additional smaller gauge catheters for their continued attempts. So, with that, any additional questions?
I wanted to clarify that the state isn't sure what the next steps kind of look like moving forward. Can you clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, I think what we've established right now is that we have a death warrant that expires today. I know, and I apologize, I've been debriefing in some other things, so I'm not as up to speed on the legal maneuvering that's taken place, but I believe we have stipulated that we will not make further attempts on this death warrant to try to carry it out. But in terms of establishing when to seek another death warrant, or if to seek another death warrant, I think those are discussions that have to happen in the days ahead to, number one, determine whether or not circumstances will be different. So those are the kind of things, those are the kind of discussions that it would be premature to say this is going to happen next until we have the benefit of having those discussions.
In terms of the state protocols, does anything plan for this sort of thing?
No, from a protocol standpoint, we have the preferred method is to establish a peripheral line. And that's what they attempted to do and finding those access sites. We have concerns about secondary methods that, this isn't, I think it's worth noting that this isn't emergency medicine. This is a heavily regulated process that requires it be treated with a deference to being mindful of not violating the Eighth Amendment or creating any cruel and unusual punishment type claims. So where there are other medical procedures that would require surgical intervention or something of that nature, there are some policies that in other states that allow for that. We're not comfortable with that at this point. But those are the types of things that we're going to be evaluating in the days ahead to try to determine the path forward.
As a follow-up on that question, Director, another state, Alabama, had used nitrogen gas when the same thing didn't occur. Is that an option for Idaho?
At this point, Idaho law provides for execution by lethal injection or firing squad now. We do not have the facilities or physical capabilities of carrying out firing squad. And we'll continue to work on those efforts. But state law doesn't allow for nitrogen hypoxia, so it would take a change in statute for that to be an option. But again, our efforts have been focused on carrying out the death penalty under the methods that are prescribed under state law today.
Director, is there a time factor with medication that is involved in this? As you seek a new death warrant, is there any concern that it expires or that there's a problem with the medication holding up until another attempt?
No concerns. I mean, our policies are pretty strict in that, we have certain standards in place to ensure that the chemicals that we use are in fact the chemicals we're supposed to use, that they're not, that we're not using anything with a beyond use date, and that we have testing to verify the authenticity of those chemicals. And so that it is the same consideration for any execution we undertake. So today's events won't change the calculus on that.
There is a timeline though where it does go bad. It does have an expiration date,
At some point,
just like
yeah,
anything.
absolutely. But again, our decision making is based on our ability to carry out an execution with dignity, professionalism, and respect, not dates on chemicals. That's a secondary issue.
Can you walk us through whether or not the drugs were actually loaded into syringes and whether or not they have now been, quote unquote, used in no longer future potential execution?
Yeah, in accordance with our policy, just prior to Mr. Creech entering the chamber, our policy prescribes that we have trays that are prepared. So the chemicals that we had for today's execution are they're unusable in future executions.
And that would be all 3 doses if you have a backup and a backup to the backup.
2 of the 3.
2 of the 3 of them. So
Yep.
there is still 1 dose that is available?
Potentially, yeah. There was one in the back.
That was my question.
Oh, I just wanted to make sure, Creech was not offered a chance to say final words because the ID was never established, is that correct?
Correct. We did not get to a place in the process where he was afforded that opportunity.
When you say he had physical examination this morning, does that have to do with assessing his veins?
Correct. Yeah, the purpose of that examination was for our medical team to assess their likelihood of being able to establish IV access. And go ahead.
Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, and as I noted before, it wasn't a simple access issue, it was also a quality issue. And in their professional judgment, and I wholeheartedly agree with it, it would not have been appropriate to try to move forward with a potential, with an IV site that is collapsed or with infiltration, so.
So following up on the backup and so forth, in order to carry out an execution, you would need a backup dose in a future potential execution, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so 2 have been used, and IDOC would then have 1 in its possession currently.
Correct, but again, I'm not going to speculate on chemicals for future executions. I think we have a high level of confidence that we'll be able to secure the chemicals necessary to carry out an execution by lethal injection, but we'll cross that bridge when it's in front of us.
But you're talking about acquisition of additional chemicals. Is that from the same supplier where these ones came from?
I will speak about our supplier as often as I always speak about our supplier, and that's to say that I won't speak about our supplier.
Fair enough, but is our understanding correct that you do expect that you'll have to seek out new chemicals for another execution attempt?
Correct.
Okay.
You said that there were 8, so solidified 8 attempts. Maybe it was right. Somebody else asked a question. And that was because there were 8 established possible injection sites.
Correct.
Okay. Is Mr. Creech's wife and his family still there? You know, he's back in his cell. Were they able to have time together afterwards?
Yeah, we as I was leaving IMSI, we were in the process of moving Mr. Creech from F block to medical so that his wife could go back and visit him again. And then the facility's making preparations right now on his longer term placement.
What did he say after your conversation after?
I have not had the conversation with him after it failed. Warden Richardson has a good rapport with Mr. Creech, and he and the warden had a conversation. I'm not aware of the contents of that conversation.
You acknowledged that this execution was unsuccessful. You said it would be wrong to call it a failure. Mr. Creech's attorneys have referred to this as a botched execution. How do you respond?
Well, I'll respond to Mr. Creech's attorneys in court, but I think from a broader context, you know, what's clear to us and what we rehearse and practice and train is that everything we do is with the goal in mind of ensuring that this process is carried out with dignity, professionalism, and respect. And when it reaches a point in that process at any step where it looks like we're going to be unable to do that, that's when we call it off. And so I think for us, it wasn't a difficult decision. It was the right decision to halt any future attempts at trying to establish IV access, let's call it, and we'll discuss next steps after that. So I think, you know, what is, you know, that's, again, our goal is to do this in a manner befitting the gravity of such an occasion, and attempting to try to move forward with an execution when you don't have the confidence it can be carried out in that respect. I think that would be the definition of a botched execution.
Director T. Walt, could you walk us through the level of medical training held by members on the medical team? Are they phlebotomists? Are they EMTs?
Yeah, I won't get into the specific medical qualifications except to say that the requirements to be a member of our medical team are clearly spelled out in our SOP, which is publicly available, and there are regular checks to ensure that they maintain their certifications. I'll go above and beyond that, as I noted before, as a demonstration of our confidence in their competence in what they do. Every single person who's involved in this execution planning process has volunteered to have IVs established by this medical team. So while they were unable to establish a suitable IV access point today, our confidence in them is unwavering.
Well, you had 2 more questions. Okay, mine's kind of a double one. So as far as you know, this has never happened in the state of Idaho before?
Correct.
Okay. And has anybody on the medical team ever performed an execution before?
Yes.
They have. In Idaho?
Correct.
Okay, so they have a history of doing so.
But just one last question then. I've always heard that when you're under attack, if you will, your veins shut down because the external veins will sort of collapse in order to protect you from attack. It's a natural thing that occurs. It doesn't make it problematic when you're fearful for your life that you're about to die, that the veins will be difficult to find.
You are asking me to weigh into an area where I have zero expertise. So I can't necessarily comment on that respect, except to note, the qualifications that are in our SOP. These medical team members are, as a routine course of their work, are used to dealing in high stress, high pressure, high stakes situations, and again, we're confident in their abilities, but I can't speak to how the circumstances may have affected Mr. Creech or the quality of his veins today.